First, I'd like to say that I appreciate the effort being made by those who try to continue to keep on recording these very short and very informal sharing. And I think this is the way, this is one part of what we have been emphasizing in the past few weeks, the importance of spiritual fellowship. And there must be people who care enough and who take part. And I myself, I'm not so interested in this kind of recording, but it does look like that it can be helpful to some who are not able to take part physically in these sessions. And also I forget what I say most of the time, and sometimes suddenly I feel I am saying something very important, at least from my own point of view. And so it may be good, it may make sense to have some kind of recording, but I hope it's not for the mere sake of recording. The very spirit, the very purpose of this kind of sharing recording should be borne in mind. And what we have been doing is that usually I highlight some important points that I made in the evening lectures, the classroom lectures, every year. But again, I must repeat that what you are going to hear is not a full version of what we have discussed in the class. And I have tried to demonstrate in the class that that what we want to emphasize is Sutta study, or for that matter even the whole of Buddhist studies, for Buddhists at least, for those who feel that they are studying for the sake of learning the Dhamma, should not be just a formal study, and each class should be, ideally at least, a spiritual experience. So I can't repeat the experience for you if you are not in the class, and what you're hearing must be only understood to be only a small part of what we have experienced in the course of 3 hours or so, or usually more, in the evening. So in the last lecture, the last 2-3 lectures we have been talking about, we have selected this year certain sutta to understand, to feel how the Buddha functioned as what we call a teacher of creative education. And by creative education we mean an education that transforms one and turns one into the attainment, or turns one to be able to attain something different, something higher than what they have been. And this one is what is meant by creative. And we have selected this time the Bhadāli Sutta, and various purposes have been pointed out to you. We will just summarize it very quickly. Last week we saw that in this sutta we witnessed how disciplinary trainings or training rules, the word is sikha or sikkhapada, how these are laid out or introduced by the Buddha. And that word itself is important because this is in contrast to in some authoritarian system in which commandments are laid down by the founder or by the teacher. We saw that the teachers, the Buddha shared the experience of eating just one meal a day, or more correctly, at one sitting. And he told the bhikkhus that he was doing like this, and he felt very light in body and mind, and very healthy. He doesn't have much sickness, and he's able to function efficiently as a teacher, and in his meditation also. So he wanted to share this with the student and recommends it to the bhikkhus. And as he was doing that, one monk called Bhadāli and stood up and said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. I declare that I will not make an effort to undertake that training factor." So first thing is we see here that these training factors are laid out in a very natural context. And it's not a demand on the part of the teacher on the students, on the bhikkhus. And the monks are encouraged. And the important feature we see is the feature of inspiration. The Buddha wanted to inspire his monks, his students, with his own experiences. He's not forcing on them. And he allows for individual differences. In this case, Bhadāli said that he could not follow, he was not going to follow this, he was not going to undertake this training factor. And he was given a chance to explain himself, and he did. And I said last week that it's important to note, to think about Bhadāli's own explanation. He said, you remember what was his reason? He said that if I were to do like this, there might arise in me remorse and regret later on. And I believe that this is psychologically very important in our behavior, in what we choose to do and not to do. First thing, you see that this is in line with what we've been talking about, the need for individual awareness, individual mindfulness, and also individual choices on the basis of that mindfulness. And one must choose to live in a certain way. One must choose to embark on the path of spiritual development. It cannot be forced on you. And you must be understanding, and you must feel happy from within your heart to want to commit yourself to a certain lifestyle, certain way of living. So this is the case in this sutta. And when there is not enough awareness and understanding, then there indeed may be remorse. And this remorse means is a situation that turns into a problem when you begin to interpret it in a negative way. And this is what I mean by the psychological significance of this. There may, for instance, in this case, the eating at one sitting is not an easy task. And if you decide to take up this training, you may experience difficulty. We all do. Even now, for perhaps not so much a spiritual reason, recently I have started to try to reduce some eating. I also experienced this kind of eating one meal a day, and also not eating up to 12 for many years. And I must, as I've said, I'm not able to do it in these last few years for various reasons. And recently I started to restrict my food intake, mostly because of medical, I must say, I must confess, from medical consideration, and is a kind of what is called intermittent fasting. And you know, I had the experience, as I said, for many, many months eating one meal a day, and had many years experience of not eating after meal. I had all this. But for the past few years I've been eating also in the evenings, and then suddenly coming back to certain days not eating after breakfast for the whole day until late at night, and take something light late at night. It became a difficulty for me, and I feel hungry, for instance, and suddenly after taking my diabetes medicine especially, and it makes you all of a sudden feel hungry, and it's not a very pleasant experience that way. And then you have to remind yourself, no, there is a purpose, and I must persevere. I must continue, and so I've been doing it, and I do feel more light in my mind, and feel more satisfaction for myself psychologically. But it is not without difficulty. But if we feel regret, like what Bhadāli says, if we interpret it as a problem, then it becomes a problem. Now these experiences of difficulty do not become a problem to me. They are difficulty, but they're not necessarily problems. And these difficulties, of course, can be, in a sense, overcome, at least to a large extent. So Bhadāli was saying that it would become a problem to him. And that problem to arise was due to the way he experienced the difficulty. He might feel that if I do like that, then it might feel, oh, I'm deprived of the chance of eating as I like, enjoying food as I like, as many people do, and then I have to suffer feeling hungry, and so if that kind of difficulty is interpreted in such a negative way, then there are problems, and it's not good for the traditional. It's not good for that particular lifestyle. And in this sutta, we observe that the Buddha allows for individual variation. This is Bhadāli. This is different from other people. Everybody has different reactions, and based on our own past experiences, our past conditioning, and also our ability to understand things. You might say, understand things spiritually. So interesting to observe the Buddha is flexible. And the Buddha said, okay, in that case, if you feel that this is going to be a problem for you, you're going to suffer like this, then you can do in a different way. You can accept a dana, offering from devotee, and then you go there and you eat one part of the food and take away the other part and eat later. Or at least the Buddha said you could eat to maintain yourself that way. So that shows that the Buddha's way of instruction is not institutional. In a way, there are no fixed rules as such. Rules are not merely for the sake of rules. Rules are meant, these are training rules, training factors are meant to help the practitioner, to help the bhikkhus. So in the case of Bhadāli, if there is some individual psychological differences arising from his own understanding and own experiences, the Buddha is prepared to be flexible. So Buddha didn't insist on him, even telling him that he could eat by taking away some part of the food. In other words, not confining himself to just one sitting. Again, Bhadāli said, no, it's the same thing. Sir, no, that also I cannot do. And because for the same reason, I would have the problem of remorse and regret. Then the Buddha left it to him. And this training factor was made known to the monks in the context of the 3-month rains retreat, and that is an important period in ancient time, and as now also, of course, at least in many quarters of monastic living. This is the period when the monks are supposed to stay together and not moving out and concentrate on their understanding of the Dhamma and on their practice. So it's a period of intense reflections and practice. It is in this context that at the beginning of that 3 months, the Buddha introduced this training factor, and it was rejected by this individual monk. In a period that the Buddha expects a monk to intensely focus on their practice, and this is the practice the Buddha believed it should be helpful for the monks. But the Buddha even then did not insist on that, and that also is because of the Buddha's insight, the understanding of the nature of that monk. And we learn a lot from the Buddha ways of handling this. The Buddha didn't say, okay, if you are not going to do that, you should not join us in this retreat, or you can get out of the Sangha, you should not be a member of my, you should not be continue to be a disciple of mine. Nothing like that. Or even the hint that you might be punished when others are doing it. Nothing like that. And it is said that for the whole 3 months, this monk did not want to present himself to the Buddha. And that was because he himself was struggling inside. And he was having conflict, and the Buddha gave him some space and time to think, to reflect. And the other thing we observe in the sutta is that at the same time, we see that the other monks function as spiritual friends. And they have this monk Bhadāli. They give him, they think about his situation, and they give him a chance to communicate with the Buddha. So according to the customary practice, towards the end of these 3 months retreats, the monks will be busy making rope for the teacher. And this is a beautiful custom, because it gives the monk a chance, it gives the students a chance to express their love and gratitude to the Buddha, and to communicate this respect, love and gratitude to the Buddha through some very concrete act. First, living together with the teacher for these 3 months is a real experience, meditating together and discussing the Dhamma together. And then towards the end, they all remember the Buddha had to go out to set forth for his wandering, and before that he must have the necessary requisites, and one important requisite was the rope. So this become a very special feature of this celebration, or this event, and everybody was busy making rope, taking part in making rope for the monk. You can imagine that probably the group was not a very big one. The Buddha never aimed at having a huge gathering. In spite of, by the way, the type of reading you see in the suttas, Buddha moving it thousands of monks, 1,250 or something like that. But in reality, you can see, you can understand that actually, normally the Buddha stay with just a small group of monks. And here also, this group of monks were taking part in making the rope for the Buddha. But they did not take the credit for themselves. They also wanted to express their love and gratitude to the teacher. But they knew that it's more important for this Bhadāli to do that. He must be given a chance. So they told Bhadāli, look here, this robe is being made for the Buddha before he's setting out for his wandering. You take this robe and offer to the Buddha. And not just for the mere offering. This is a sign for you to reflect on any wrongdoing of yours. And you remember I told you, Bhadāli was told to think about his dosakang, sadhukang, manasi karohi. To think, to reflect properly on your fault. Dosakang also has connotation of a small fault. It's not necessarily a very big fault, not. It's very interesting. That means that this rule of not eating after exactly 12 came to be very mechanically interpreted in many circles now, in most Theravada communities. But it was not like that. We have proof, we have evidence now that it was not such a fixed rule, and not looking at the time, and not exactly what time, and not exactly what you can take, whether it's liquid milk or whether it is cheese, or in some quarters, not like that. These have become legalistic, unfortunately, and mechanical. But the spirit of it was to simplify your life, and to experience detachment and lightness of body and mind, and to focus on your practice and your teaching. So actually, this rule of not eating after a certain period, even if you interpret it to mean exactly after 12, in some quarters they told me that you can eat up to 12:20, exactly, but not more than that. It becomes very mechanical. Actually, the Buddha didn't make a big fuss of it. But I've explained on other occasions and how the rule of not eating up in the evening came about also in other suttas. Anyway, so Bhadāli was given the chance and said, the monk told him, you think carefully about this. This may be a dosaka, maybe a small fault, but don't let it become a bigger difficulty for you. Don't let it become dukkaratara. It's very interesting. Dukaratarang hoti. Let it not be ahosi. Let it not become a bigger difficulty for you. You have some difficulty. This is psychological, and if you had that difficulty, that rebellion attitude, or whether it's due to your egotism, or whether it's due to your inability to understand what the Buddha is trying to communicate to you, or what is good for you, don't let it become even more serious. Because if it becomes more serious as a difficulty, correspondingly you will have a bigger problem. There will become bigger problems to you. And from small problem, it become a bigger and bigger problem. So when you have this kind of psychological difficulty, you should clear them. That's something we learned in this episode also. So Bhadāli was reminded to do so, and Bhadāli agreed. He agreed because he must have been a sincere monk. In spite of his rebellions, his seeming arrogance, in his heart he was thinking over things and trying to resolve his conflict within him. So he took the robe to the Buddha and told the fortunate one, the Bhagava, please accept my transgression as a transgression. I told you to note that word as a transgression. It means that now here this is a very important part, because in this part we discern the fundamental difference between a Buddhist confession and, for instance, in contrast to a Catholic kind of confession or any confession in an authoritarian system. Bhadāli is not confessing out of fear. First of all, he was not demanded to confess. He undertook. He agreed. He went to the Buddha himself. The Buddha never said, you come, you have to confess, otherwise you'll be kicked out. You'll be excommunicated. You'll be punished. Nothing like that. And he went to Buddha willingly, voluntarily, and he told the Buddha in a very moving way, please accept my fault. I was overcome, or thought overcame me. And I was foolish. Also overcame me. I make the mistake, I make the transgression as one who is foolish. Yatha balang, yatha muhang, yatha akusalang. As one who is foolish, as one who is confused. That is my confusion. I couldn't understand what is in my heart, in my mind. And as one whose mindset is unwholesome, akusala. So I make the transgression. Please accept the transgression as a transgression. Achayang, achayato. So that means, first of all, as I said, he reflected, and with understanding, he made the confession to the Buddha himself. And he knew what he was doing. So this confession was made not out of fear, not out of demand, and not out of institutional need, not out of consideration of any legality here. He wouldn't be kicked out. Nobody was going to punish him. But he wanted to communicate that very honestly to the Buddha. And when someone does like that, someone feels a tremendous psychological relief. And that's very, very important. And this is communication. So he asked the Buddha to accept, that is to forgive his fault as a force. That means that he sees a fault like this, he sees the transgression like that, and he wants the Buddha to see in that way, and to accept his understanding of the fault. So achayang, achayato. So this is, as I said, important. This part is important for us to understand the difference between the type of non-authoritarian system of confession. Or put a different way, to see the psychological significance of confession. Actually, we should confess all the time, even if we can't confess to others, in our heart or in front of the Buddha. Confession is an acceptance of your own imperfection, your own honesty, that I'm struggling and I have an imperfection with me, I can see this, and but I don't want to let this guilt feeling remain in my mind as a big rock on my back. I want to have a relief from this. So when one does confession this way, actually it's a very positive act. And it is very important to do this so that we can proceed, we can continue with our struggle. It's not out of any demand or fear, like we can see in the case of Bhadāli. In the case of, for instance, authoritarian religion like For instance, Catholicism, we know that confession is demanded, as demanded by the institution, by the system. And you can't confess to others except the priest. The priest mediates between God and you. And then you must confess so that you can be, as it were, saved according to them. Here, Bhadāli is not thinking of being saved by the Buddha in that sense, or preserving himself as a member of that institution. Out of his own willingness, he wants to communicate. He wants to pour it out from his heart. He wants to be honest to himself. He wants to be honest to his teacher. And he knows that this is the way to overcome his problem. And then the Buddha said, also in a very important way, the Buddha says, the Buddha repeat first, you are confessing because you have seen your fault as a fault. Out of your own foolishness, out of your confusions, out of your unwholesome mental state, you have been overcome. The wording are very important. Someone is overcome by a transgression. It's not that you have broken any code, any legality, legal requirements. You are overcome. This is a psychological problem by that transgression. And having seen this, you want to do something about it in a positive way. You want to amend for it. And this is very important. Of course, we accept you, the Buddha said. We accept you, not just I accept you. That word mayang is extremely interesting. And the Buddha is thinking of the whole spiritual community. So, and the Buddha says, Buddhi Hesa. The Buddha said, this is growth. For one who has seen a transgression as a transgression and then wants to amend for it. This is growth in the Arya Vinaya. In other words, in the spiritual discipline that person is undertaking. When one can confess like that, this is growth. This is not like purging your sin. It's not like getting saved, not anything like that. It's not like rescuing yourself from being expelled. Or it's not like saying, if you do like this, then it's good for my name, it's good for the name of my institution or my sangha, you know, my disciple come to confess to me, and it means that my disciple finally decides to agree with me, accept my teaching. It's nothing like that. The Buddha is emphasizing that this is growth for him. We need to grow, and we grow through problems. And it's only natural. It's very important. And often it's important to have problem in this way. Then when we can overcome this, then it's a breakthrough. You come to higher levels. And this is being creative. And this is being a creative system of education. Growth. Growth means transformation. The word is buddhi. Growth not in the sense of for that person also, that you are now recognized, you are free from punishment or nothing like that, and also not in the sense of growth in respect of the institution. you have more members who agree to accept certain regulations, and then you grow bigger and bigger, and this is growth also for the institution. This is not what is expected by the Buddha. This is not growth in the proper sense, in the spiritual sense. So that makes us think about what is growth, what we want when we do a confession, when we practice, when we struggle. What is the purpose of all this? It's for your spiritual growth. Your spiritual growth means for your own for your own personal development. The growth is development for your own transformation. If that doesn't happen, then the Dhamma is not creative education. You're not being transformed. So the Buddha said, Buddhi esa. That means this is growth. When you can honestly and happily accept your own imperfection, your own transgressions, and you see clearly, and then you want to do something about it. So it's very important to also, therefore, to see how the Buddha accepts it. The Buddha said, of course we accept you. Of course we forgive you. Not for my sake, not for the sake of institution. For you, for your growth. Now, this is only one part that we have seen. And then the Buddha, after that, goes on to explain to him. The Buddha doesn't stop there. First, his assurance of his acceptance, his forgiving. And that's very, very important. And then a creative education doesn't stop like that. Yeah, there must be there's some positive teaching that helps the person, especially at such an important juncture or breakthrough. And so the Buddha goes on to explain to him, and Buddha explains and give two cases. In one case, a person does not fulfill the trainings. Well, you can see that this has reference to the way, to such example as his Bhadāli's own way of not wanting to undertake a certain training, that the Buddha, someone like the Buddha, assures the monks to be beneficial, spiritually beneficial. So these trainings they are not specified as 100 rules, 5 rules, 10 rules, 1,000 rules. They are not these rules as such. They are the general sikha. It's a training. The Buddha said here, supposing a bhikkhu is one who is sikkaya aparipurakari. That means one who does not fulfill the trainings, and not specified in any rigid way. So such a person then goes on to want to attain higher states, spiritual states. So you can see that in this example, that person is actually also can be a sincere practitioner. He doesn't simply reject or disagree to the Buddha's teaching simply out of ego, thinking I know, why should I follow another person's opinions? I know better. I'm cleverer. Not like that. And because he wants to proceed to have distinctive spiritual attainment. So what does this person do? He thinks, if I go to a forest a hermitage, the root of the tree, and if I meditate, if I practice like this, then I will gain the attainment. I don't need to follow this, follow that, this kind of training recommended to me. So he goes on. Now that the fact that he goes on means that he is actually seeking something spiritually. So he's not necessarily, he's not, to say the least, he's not necessarily a useless person, and he must have been a sincere person. He goes on. He actually goes to a forest. He actually begins to meditate. But as he does like this, when he communicates with the teacher censors him, the teacher criticizes him, because the teacher knows, the teacher would not simply endorse him. You see, out of the benefit of the student, the teacher would not simply endorse that kind of decision. The teacher knows that this person has not got the foundation. The person wants to skip that foundation and to go on to gain spiritual attainment. They will not work for him. So the teacher's duty is to criticize, is to point out. So the teacher does like this, and his core practitioners who are wise, who have come to know about the fact that he skipped all this training and he wants straight away to get into meditation in a forest and expecting spiritual attainment. They also know that this will not work for him, so they also will censor him, will criticize him, quite rightly. So it says that even the divine beings censor him. And very interesting thing in this paragraph, and finally it says, even he himself censors himself, because he is a sincere person, and he must have been having conflict within him. So now that means that if you can even have this sincerity and want to meditate and think that if I get the right meditation, and then everything will be okay. But it doesn't happen that way. And one important thing is your psychological state. This person, Bhadāli, if he does, or this monk in the case of the Buddha's example, first of all would have a psychological hindrance. He must, as a sincere person, he must feel that he's not practicing. He's not going through the training, the steps of training as recommended to him, and this way of practicing does not tally with the experiences, the insight of his teacher, his spiritual friends. And then also, within himself, he has his own doubt also. Am I doing the right thing? Now this doubt, this dissatisfaction, this feeling that he is not in line with people whom he can trust, whom he admires, this is an important psychological hindrance also. So with this hindrance in his mind, he cannot progress properly. And finally, the Buddha says, this monk does not attain the state he expects to attain, the spiritual states. And then the Buddha asked Bhadāli, do you know why? It is because he has not fulfilled the trainings. So, what does it mean? It means that the training is not for the mere sake of the training. The rules are not for the mere sake of the rules. Not for any formality, not for any legality reasons. Training factors are recommended by the Buddha to him. It is for that person his own spiritual progress. It is for that person's own problems psychologically and spiritually. So he skips the foundation, and all the rest of the effort will be in vain. So the Buddha wants to convey that message to Bhadāli. So in other words, if the Buddha had recommended a rule like eating less or eating once a day, there's a reason for that. That reason is not because his system demands it, not because he does it himself and he wants all disciples to simply blindly follow his example, accept his recommendation. It is for the student's own good, own spiritual good. And so the Buddha explains it in this example, in this case study. A monk who doesn't lay the foundation of training, and then he skips this, even with his sincerity, wanting to seek something higher, he fails. And he fails, firstly, because there are psychological blockages, the hindrances within him. He doesn't feel happy. He cannot feel happy because not that he is scared that he will be punished by the teacher or by his spiritual friend, but then the fact that he feels somehow he is not aligned with them. And they are the people whom he should trust. People who have more experiences than he himself spiritually, in spiritual practice. He falls as if out of line in that sense. So this is one. Secondly, he himself, because of sincerity, the more sincere you are, the more problem you may have. But you have more conflicts. So you must know how to handle a conflict. That's why I say, in my critique of this kind of modern system of emphasizing meditation out of context, is that without the context means your whole personality, your lifestyle, your goal, your commitment, and the system of Dhamma, the teachers, the spiritual friends. This is a totality of context. Without that, when something happens to you, when you're in conflict, when you have depression, or when you have, doubt in your mind, you don't know how to handle it. You will just simply collapse. Either you feel like giving up the whole spiritual practice, your whole meditation practice, or worse still, you can become insane. And the more sincere you are, the more likelihood such a thing may happen. Why am I like this? For instance, we all have desire, we all have anger, we all have delusions. If we don't understand that according to the Buddha teaching, this is simply part of human nature, then we don't know how to relate our problems to our existence as a human being. We don't know where we are, we don't know what we can do next. We don't have teachers, we don't have friends to accept us, to support us. Then we have even greater difficulties. So this is what I mean by the totality context. So in the case of that example the Buddha gives also, a person who feels out of line with the teacher, with his spiritual friends, and with his own sincerity, own conscience, that person, the more sincere the person is, the more problem he will have. That's when he needs friends, spiritual friends, not ordinary friends. That's when he needs a teacher. That's when he needs even a tradition. He needs a Dhamma. If he doesn't have that, he thinks I'm very clever and very smart. I can just I know that if I go to the forest and meditate, I will do better. I will attain all these things. Finally, he will just collapse. So this is the case. So the Buddha says, ask Bhadāli. Tang kissa hetu. What is the reason? The reason is this: he doesn't have the proper preparation. You can say that this is an important part of what I have just called the totality context. He's doing his meditation out of context, his spiritual struggle out of context. Then the Buddha gives a contrasting case. In another case, a monk first he fulfills the practices, the trainings, the sikkha's first, and then in the same way, he also thinks of attaining higher spiritual states, distinctive spiritual states. Then he goes to the forest. He seeks seclusion, and he meditates, and he succeeds. Then the Buddha goes on to explain in detail how he succeeds. He, following his fulfillment of the foundational preparation, he's able to enter into the first jhana, then second jhana, and then third jhana, and then fourth jhana. All these are described in details. And then, on the basis of that, he's able to gain the so-called supernormal insight. He gained insight to be able to see his past life vividly. So, he verifies to himself the teaching of rebirth. Next, he gained insight into the dying and rebirth of sentient beings, in general, other sentient beings, with all the details. And he verifies himself about the truth of samsaric wandering and the truth of karma, how each person is reborn in very specific ways, how each person experiences his or her particular rebirth in very specific way in accordance with his karma. So in other words, he sees not just, he just doesn't just learn it from the book or from the teacher about rebirth, about samsaric entanglement or samsaric suffering, or about karma, but he verifies through his own personal insight. And he's able to do that because he gained these jhanas. And finally, he's able to gain insight into the exhaustion of all his outflows, all his defilements. He knows that he has transcended birth. He has fulfilled the spiritual life. He has done what needs to be done. He has come to the final goal of arahathood, in other words. So the Buddha explained like this. All this starts from first his foundational practices. And that is, in other words, the reason for disciplines. Not for the mere sake of discipline. It's for yourself, so that the so-called sila is an instrument, so that you can come to a state of unification of all your mental energies. You come to a state of equipoise, and then on the basis of that, you come to gain insight into your past life, into the working of karma, and then finally the realization that you have gained the final goal. In the case of the first example that the Buddha gives, in spite of the sincerity of that practitioner, yes, he does want to gain something higher, but because of his own arrogance, because of not having prepared the foundation, he fails. So that description is a illustration of the very purpose of the Buddha's introducing training factors. I say again, that's not for the sake of preserving the institution, not for the sake of legality, not for the sake of convention of society, but it is for the sake of the foundation for higher attainments. It's in order for spiritual attainment, spiritual practice. So when you look at this whole sutta, you can realize how the Buddha introduced all these trainings, all these so-called rules, because what he really wants is not the preservation of this institution, but what he really wants are the good, the welfare, the benefit of the monks, of his disciples. And the way he introduces is through inspiration, not by demand. And then the way he transformed Bhadāli is first of all to give him, to consider his individual difficulties and the recognition that everybody needs some space. Everybody is different. We are all different in different senses. We have different problems, we have different backgrounds, we have different karma, we have different karmic hindrances, we have different experiences. So training factors, though they are laid down even for the sake of the spiritual welfare of the disciples, are never rigidly done, never rigidly laid down. And individual considerations are given in the case of Bhadāli. And then the Buddha's way of accepting his transgression is also very important. In the Sangha, I was just now telling you about this practice of the 3-month retreats. At the end of this, everybody confesses to everybody else. There's mutual confession among the members who observe the retreat, and everybody is accepted and forgiven, is encouraged. Everybody feel relief and happy, and that's a very important psychological factor, so that everybody can continue to struggle, to move on. So we saw the Buddha's compassion there in that sense. But the compassion doesn't stop there. He gives further concrete explanations. These explanations are very important, and these are specific. In the case of Bhadāli, he needs to know why the Buddha was trying to introduce certain training factors. So through these 2 cases, the Buddha demonstrates the point to him that it is on the basis of fulfilling or undertaking the training factors that we can come to realistically achieve spiritual attainment, insight, and final enlightenment. There's a lot to learn, and then Bhadāli goes on to ask some very, very important questions, and that also shows that the Buddha knows that this monk is a very sincere monk and very intelligent monk, in spite of the fact that he is rebellious. That's also very interesting, and all this can help us to understand how Buddha functions as a creative teacher. He considers the personality types. And there are very interesting questions and very extremely important answers in this sutta, and we shall continue to share in the next session.